Sorry if I get distracted because I'm letting people into the room also. And please stop me for questions or comments as always. So last week we were discussing the source of evil in the world, the source of everything bad. And we said that obviously Hashem is the cause and creator for everything that exists in creation. But there's a difference how Hashem creates good and how he creates evil. The way Hashem creates good is by shining his light, by his ha'ara, whatever it is, being mashpia into the world. And evil, and that's a direct causation, whereas evil, Hashem doesn't directly create evil. Rather, he creates a koach, he creates a source which is lacking some of his light. And from that source, it evolves into evil. So we're just going to continue from last week where we were. And that is Chelik Aleph, Perek Hey Os Tes, which is 159. Okay, let's start. V'hine, Chiluki madregos harbe yesh be'inyan kochos hara shezacharnu, v'hanishba mehem. There are many different levels of evil and what is influenced from them. Ubederach klal, nikra l'nishba mehem. And in general, those things which are influenced by them, the sources of evil, they are called Tuma, Cheshech, Vizuhama, Ochol. So that is impurity, darkness, Zuhama, pollution they translate it as, or Chol, which is profane. Many people may be surprised hearing the word Chol, because Chol usually just means, not holy, or, during the week. We have Chol and we have Shabbos. We have Chol is something which is just not holy. So why does that make it one of the forces of evil? So he points out, Rabbi Nahum points out on the bottom that actually technically the mundane is not is part of evil. It's not absolute evil, and he points out that's why the Ramchal writes Tuma Choshech Zuama Ochol, because someone wants to come in, because Chol is a different type of quote unquote evil, whereas Tuma Choshech and Zuama are objectively evil. Chol is something which is related to evil, but it has the potential to become holy. For example, there's a mitzvah to add on to Shabbos. We add on to the mundane part of the week to sanctify it, to infuse even the chol, the mundane, with holiness. So that is only with chol, but that doesn't happen that with the other ones, which is Tuma, Choshech, and Zuama. Those are actual forces of Toma, but part of being a Jew is to take the mundane and to subjugate it to holiness, right? That's the whole idea, basically, right? We had it's much harder to to come close to Hashem during a regular weekday than it was during Sukkot or during Yantiv, when there's a natural infusion of holiness. But our job during the weekdays is to infuse those weekdays with holiness, and even we discussed many times, even when we're eating, which seems to be a mundane act, even that mundane act of eating can be infused with holiness if our intent when we eat is that we want to have strength to serve Hashem. So there we took a mundane act and we made it holy, and we brought that closer to Hashem. So the mundane could be transformed into holy. So while it's technically part of the forces of evil, it's significantly different than absolute evil. Now, these are real things, right? These are real spiritual forces. Choshech, Tuma, Zuama. He doesn't discuss the differences between each of them, but they're real spiritual forces, right? This is what entered Adam HaRishon after Adam sinned. These impure forces, they existed outside of Adam. After he sinned with the fruit, then these forces became part of man. So we have impure forces that try to get us to sin. How is this relevant to us? Well, for the Rav Chaim Volozhner says that the explanation of the Mishnah of Avera Goreres Avera, one sin leads to another sin. How does that happen? One sin leads to another sin, because when a person does a sin, he causes that impurity. He creates a force of impurity which enters him, and that force of impurity pushes him to do more sins. He created an actual spiritual force which is now going to push him and try to sway him to do more sins in the future. So these are real forces. Also, these forces create a blockage between us and Hashem. As a question, I'm just going to answer that 1 second. there is it creates a blockage between us and Hashem. So, for example, it's much harder to connect to holiness when we have these forces. Now, there are two sins specifically which cause these forces to become part of a person and to create a blockage between us and God, and to make, kind of our spiritual antenna become numb, and that we're not influenced by spirituality. And those are the sins of machalos asuros, eating forbidden foods, and isurei bia, illicit sexual relations. Both of those sins cause a person to become distant, to become blocked from Hashem, and to not be perceptive to holiness. And that can even affect a person's logic. Thank you. Someone came in with a camera, so it looks like I'm talking to a person. Thank you so much. Makes it a lot easier. That I think we have mentioned this before. That Rav Chanan Wasserman, the pasuk says, "Lo sasur achrei levavchem ve'achrei einechem." You should not follow after your heart. What does that mean? That means heresy. That the seeds of heresy, to think of heretical thoughts, to deny the existence of God, that is in the heart. So why is that in the heart? What is an intellectual decision, if there's a God or if there's not a God, have to do with the heart? The answer is because the Yetzer Hara tries to entice us to not believe in God. It's not an intellectual thing where people don't believe in Hashem, because they're enticed by the Yetzer Hara to find excuses why God doesn't exist, and to think of anything which could even be irrational, so that they're not subjugated to the will of Hashem. And when a person, chas v'shalom, commits sins, and he's influenced by these forces of impurity, this tuma, zuama, and chayshech that becomes part of him, then it becomes easier for him to reject HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to perform more sins, and these forces have a practical impact on a negative practical impact on people's lives. Now, somebody asked, are these different than our Yetzer Hara? So Rav Yisrael Salanter says that there are two parts of the Yetzer Hara. We're human beings, so we have a natural inclination for physical things, to eat and to reproduce, and that's part of our physical makeup. That's one part. And then there's a second part, which is the Yetzer Hara, which are these spiritual forces that, in addition to these natural bodily instincts we have, there are negative spiritual forces which are part of us, which try to get us to sin. So yes, these are part of the Yetzer Hara. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, I think it's in Igeris HaMusar, I believe, he talks about this. Again, two parts of the Yetzer Hara are natural physical drives, and these spiritual forces that get us to sin. So now, that was all very negative, but there's an opposite to this too. And now that's all of the ha'aras, the forces that come about from the forces of evil. And again, the forces of evil are created from a spiritual force that God created with a lacking of his light, which evolves into these evil forces. Now, what about the holiness? Now, the forces of good that come about from Hashem being mashpia, his light, they are called kedusha, vitahara, or ubracha, holiness, purity, light, and blessing. Ukeyotze bazeh, similar to this. Aval behavchanas pratei ha'inyanim navchin minei hasugim ha'elu frateim. There's a lot of details. Shaleim soveves kol hanhaga sha'adon baruch hu menayeg es olamo. And all of these are related to how Hashem conducts the world. So we have these positive actual spiritual forces and these negative spiritual forces. And the same thing that we mentioned in the Mishnah in Avos, Rav Chaim Volozhner's interpretation, that avera goreres avera, a sin causes a person to do another sin because he infuses himself with these negative, impure spiritual forces. So the opposite is also true when you do a mitzvah. If you do one mitzvah, it leads to another mitzvah. What's the reason? Because when you do a mitzvah, you get that holiness, and Hashem is mashpia on you. So that makes a natural inclination for you to want to do more mitzvahs, and leads you to fulfill more mitzvahs because you have that positive spiritual energy with you, if you will. Okay, that was Tes. Let's do Yud. V'amnam. Hine, l'chol enyin ma'anyanim eila, with all of these topics, nimtza pkidim memunim misug hamalachi shebiarna lamala. on all of these things that we are discussing, the different types of good and evil, there are angels which are appointed on all of them. From the different types of angels that we mentioned earlier, right? There's a lot of different levels of angels. Angels have different jobs. All of this, we're just scratching the surface, but there are many, many types of all of these things. So these angels are appointed on all of these forces to make everything happen into the physical world, right? We mentioned a few weeks ago that everything which exists in the physical world has a source in the spiritual world, and it all begins with the kochos, which are these supernal forces where Hashem is mashpia into, and it evolves down until our physical world. So on all of these various spiritual forces, there are angels which are appointed, im l'tov ve'im l'mutov, whether good or bad. There are good angels appointed over the positive spiritual forces, and quote-unquote bad angels which are appointed over the negative spiritual forces. And they are the servants of Hashem. They do His will. That's how He wanted to set it up. Now these angels, they just do exactly what Hashem says. And it seems from here that these angels, they don't have any free will, but it's just so clear to them what Hashem is that they are appointed to carry out Hashem's will. I believe there's a discussion if angels have free will, and I think some say when they have a body, and when they come into this world as a body, then it could be in those scenarios they have free will, but I believe that's a larger discussion. So Hashem, the way Hashem's decrees are put into action are through these angels, according to what He points them to do and what is transmitted into their hands. So we have all of these forces, and then we have angels which are appointed over the forces and over everything to actualize and to make everything happen in the physical world. Now, Rabbi Naaman points out a very fundamental thing. If you're following along, it's footnote 133. I think it's Kedai to read. He says, why did Hashem have to create the world like this? Hashem doesn't need angels to carry out His will. And he brings from the Haggadah that many times in the Haggadah over Pesach we read where Hashem did something, quote unquote Himself. Why does He need angels to do everything? Right? Hashem doesn't have to make the world like that. So he says a very nice analogy. He says, when we understand how things work in the physical world, then we could apply them. We could work with them. We know how gravity works, so therefore we can make an airplane. We know how wind currents work, and we know how the ocean currents work, so we can build a boat. So he says, once we know how the spiritual world works, then we can apply what we learn to the spiritual world. And guess what? We just finished section 1. Mazel tov. Should make a siyum. There's 4 sections of the book, and we just finished the first section. It's very exciting. I didn't think we'd get this far. So that's awesome. The next section, I was going to start today, but I think we'll wait till next week. It's a good stopping point. The next section is about hashgacha, right? Hashem made us. So now what? So we're going to learn about how Hashem watches over us, how Hashem watches over all of creation, the difference between how Hashem looks over human beings versus animals, despite what many animal activists might think. Hashem does not care about each single fly in the world or each single chicken. And that'll be next week. So someone asked for a summary of section 1. Wasn't prepared to do that, but we can try. That we learned some things about Hashem. I'm not going to say that over because I'm going to mess it up, and I don't know it well enough to say it over. But we said that the reason Hashem created the world is because He wants to do good. Hashem is a being that is totally good, and He wants to. Once Hashem wants to do good, He wants to bestow the best and ultimate good. And the way that occurs is a creation. He made a creation where this creation can acquire perfection, because when this creation is perfect, they're similar to Hashem, and they can cling to Hashem, and the greatest good is to cling to the ultimate good, which is Hashem. And the way to do this was by giving this creation free will. And that is the main purpose of creation, this being which has free will, and that only being is humans. And humans have the opportunity to become complete by fulfilling the commandments which Hashem gave us. And when we do that, we become similar to Hashem by being shalom, and we get close to Hashem. And then we discussed that every action that we do affects the spiritual world, because everything that exists in the physical world is connected to the spiritual world. And I think we talked about other things also, but Someone just asked me to summarize on the fly, so that's the best I can do. Any questions on anything? Comments? There's a question from last week I still have to get back to somebody about. But any other questions? All right, thank you to everyone for coming, and looks like we have some new people. Thanks for coming, and thanks for the one non-black box. So, have a great evening. See ya.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry I was late.
No problem.